Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is part 2 of Supernatural Child Abductions. God damn it, Torgo. Thank you. My name is Mike Lucht. This is Kooks, Cranks, and Iconoclasts. And, I kind of had to split right down the middle because this was like a 4-hour series altogether. I also want to add that this does contain a good deal towards the end. Much of Joshua Cutchin's own kind of ideas as regarding autism, the autism spectrum, and encounters with the supernatural as children. I decided to leave it in. I was kind of on the fence about it because, once again, I know nothing about this stuff. And I don't want to come off like I do know anything about it. But I do think he's asking some important questions. If nothing else, it's food for thought. So I decided to keep it in. I will say, however, for my own part, just for transparency's sake, I do think that there's a evolutionary component to the rise of autism. I don't know what that is, but there it is. And yeah, this is part 2. This is going to be a little bit darker than the last one as well. So fair warning. There are some fetal recipes in here. Bigfoot abductions, etc. some dark stuff. So just, you've been warned. Here we go. Part 2 of Supernatural Child Abductions. Thanks for listening. Perhaps even more chilling, if not just outright weird as all hell, are the many reported instances, and there's a lot of these, of children having nocturnal encounters with figures like Elmo, Big Bird, Mickey Mouse, Bugs Bunny, and other such beloved children's figures mysteriously walking out of closets or knocking on their windows and beckoning them out to come and play. This may sound ridiculous on the surface, but actually points to another much more insidious form of subterfuge, which also, oddly enough, somewhat harkens back to the vampire folklore as well. Strangely enough, such reports as these are far more common than you'd think. Check out the super awesome YouTube channel Beyond Creepy. It's one of my favorites. Or listen to Belief Hole, a couple Belief Hole podcast episodes, and you will hear about these imposter entities quite often. It's very strange. Speaking of very strange, and I'm just going to say it, missing fetuses. It's a deeply disturbing aspect of alien abduction phenomena. The focus on reproduction, pregnancy interference, and sexualized encounters. It draws parallels to both folklore and modern UFO lore, emphasizing the trauma and mystery surrounding these experiences. There's the case of Anne, who in 1974, she's a young woman repeatedly abducted by small humanoid greys, subjected to invasive and painful examinations, then inexplicably becomes pregnant despite being on birth control and no sexual contact in her normal life. The pregnancy later mysteriously ends after another abduction. The pregnancy interference, such as mysteriously just becoming pregnant or miscarriages, it's a common motif in abduction stories. Aliens appear highly preoccupied with sexuality and reproduction, conducting gynecological exams and fertility tests, such as the needle in the navel of Betty Hill in 1961. Once again, the reproductive aspects of much of this is going to be covered in future episodes of our ultra-terrestrial overlords, because it's just a massive thing. It's so central to these things. I don't know what it is, but it's weird. We even covered during our sleep paralysis episode that there's it just shows up again and again. Researchers, specifically Carla Turner, from what I remember, note a pattern of sexual assault, nudity, and even increased masturbation reported by abductees. I think she specifically and her husband, if I'm remembering the book correctly, it's been a while since I read it, they had quite a boost to their sex life after they found out they were both being repeatedly abducted by aliens. Skeptics interpret abductions variously as symbolic expressions of repressed sexuality or psychosexual phenomena or drama. The irony is the iconic Greys lack genitals. Yet the phenomenon centers strongly on reproductive themes. I don't know. Maybe there's a link there. Maybe not. I don't know. Oh, boy. There's historical and mythological parallels, such as long-standing folklore and religious stories featuring divine or supernatural beings revealing or influencing pregnancies, i.e., Mary's Annunciation, the Nativity, the Nephilim. Say it again. Since at least the 1950s, reports include aliens predicting details about unborn children, reinforcing a theme of interest in human reproduction. Miscarriages, missing fetuses and retrievals, pregnancy complications linked to supernatural interference occur worldwide throughout history. Abduction lore uses the clinical term quote-unquote retrievals for forced removal of fetuses. Some examples include Pamela Johnson, I believe that's the name, Pamela, 1978, after a UFO encounter and missing time, her confirmed pregnancy vanished. She recalled aliens removing it with a vibrating wire device. Jesus. There's a woman named Laura, 1986, South Africa. She experienced nightly visits from alien beings while trying to conceive with repeated miscarriages. Whitley Strieber, 1988. His partner Anne had a miscarriage after a night of intense alien dreams. There's the Cahill abduction in Australia, 1993. This is a scary one. Bedtime Stories covers it. I suggest checking that out. Try and include any videos I've mentioned in the show notes. She experienced missing time, a new scar, prolonged bleeding, an infection after a UFO sighting, later recalling red-eyed beings claiming peaceful intent. Yeah, right. Some abductees seeking abortions find no fetal tissue medically, suggesting possible mysterious fetal disappearance. This particular phenomenon reveals a dark and often overlooked side of alien abduction accounts, a fixation on reproduction, pregnancy, manipulation, and sexual intrusion. I don't want to use the... Yeah. Women report being subjected to invasive examinations, unexplained pregnancies, and miscarriages that align suspiciously with abduction events. These experiences resonate with global cultural narratives of supernatural interference in childbirth and fertility, now reframed in a modern UFO context. The emotional and physical trauma for abductees, once again, is profound. If there's nothing else, the trauma is there. It's the only thing that you can be sure is real, basically. With many feeling violated and powerless, the persistent interest of aliens in human reproductive processes raises very unsettling questions about the purpose and nature of these encounters. There's miscarriages without abduction memories. Some witnesses sometimes experience miscarriages after UFO sightings, even without explicit abduction memories. There's cases like there's one in Pecém, Brazil, I believe that's how you pronounce it, 1982, and the Netherlands in 1984 that involved pregnant women who saw strange lights. They just saw strange lights, fled, and subsequently miscarried. That could be due to shock. I don't know. I'm not a doctor in any way whatsoever. Stress and exertion could contribute. Don't fully explain all incidents, such as the 1988 Carnaubinha, Brazil case, where glowing humanoid figures appeared. These incidents often feature children or school settings, echoing supernatural folklore involving streams and spirits. MUFON has a 1996 study that found only 34 of 149 female subjects had reproductive interference, suggesting the trend is not universal. A smaller 2012 study indicated 69% of female abductees reported gynecological issues, higher than controls. Miscarriages tend to be recurrent, 3 to 5 times more so. It happen mostly between 2 to 3 months gestation. It happen mostly 2 to 3 months gestation, the time when most natural miscarriages occur. Abductees often recall fetal extraction as surgical, sometimes under hypnosis, with vivid descriptions of alien procedures. It's fucking horrifying. Common odors, like rotten eggs or hydrogen sulfide, and cinnamon or ammonia, are often reported in UFO cases. Hydrogen sulfide exposure can cause miscarriages. Cases exist where abductees reportedly receive unknown pills or substances, possibly affecting fertility. This kind of relates back to fairy lore abductions. You're not supposed to eat anything they give you. The man who got the pancakes, I believe, was probably the only guy who got away, at least in the folklore, out of the folklore. Dr. Michael Persinger of God Helmet fame proposed a correlation between electromagnetic fields from UFOs and reproductive or cancer problems in local populations. Medical conditions such as secondary amenorrhea, blighted ovum, missed abortions, pseudocyesis can explain many missing fetus syndrome claims without alien involvement. Some high-profile cases, such as that of a woman by the name of Morgana Van Clausen, with a K, have been debunked or explained as medical misunderstandings. In many cases, resist easy explanation and may represent a psychological or psychosomatic overlay of trauma and belief. Physicist Hal Puthoff of remote viewing fame speculated that quote-unquote other dimensionals might enter reality at birth, and aborted fetuses might linger in an in-between state, resonating with fairy lore about unbaptized or stillborn children becoming fairy spirits. There is a strange byline through a lot of abduction lore about soul transference, the gray aliens being whatever we are before we're born, things like that. Saying they have the right to do this, to do what they're doing. It's very strange. I'm not even prepared to unbox all of that. It's very strange. Various cultures have myths about child spirits and fertility beings awaiting or interacting with the mortal realm. Tales of reincarnation that involve, I don't know, monks or just the spiritually adept, or even black magicians, basically selecting specifically who they want to be reborn into, or hijacking babies to be born a certain way. Once again, this comes back to occult eugenics, as I mentioned earlier, but once again, that will also be future episodes down the line. I'm still actually looking into the whole occult eugenics thing, because that's a mindfuck, and there's a lot of aspects, ins and outs, no pun intended, and lots of what have yous. Some abductees suffer infertility after encounters. Others unexpectedly regain fertility or become pregnant despite menopause or sterilization. Alien artificial wombs or extrauterine gestation have been theorized by researchers like David Jacobs, who I've also expressed I have certain reservations about, as well as Bud Hopkins. I'll say right now, for the sake of transparency, I have certain reservations about so-called hypnotherapists such as Hopkins, but especially Jacobs. And I haven't read any of his books, but I've listened to him on Coast to Coast on 1 or 2 episodes, and the way that Jacobs describes the behaviors and interactions with human-alien hybrids, or quote-unquote hybrids, as I believe he calls them, during these Art Bell interviews, makes them sound like the absolute least threatening, dim-witted, ineffectual beings in the cosmos. But hey, that's just me. And apparently they can, read our minds and extract thoughts and truth from us via psychic means, but then they need people to teach them how to dress. I don't understand it. And there's other things about... Just go listen to David Jacobs on Coast to Coast and just pick apart what he's saying. That's all I can say. There's just so much, I don't know, it doesn't add up for me. Anywho, such ideas loosely align with modern scientific experiments on artificial wombs, but that's all speculative. Folklore often associates fairies or spirits with fertility manipulation, suggesting a symbolic or archetypal continuity of some kind. There's anomalous pregnancies in hand with hybridization programs. Unexpected pregnancies and abductees are reported, but difficult to verify statistically. Medical records are sealed, obviously, and it's invasive. And just asking about it and trying to obtain such information. Some abductees conceive despite contraceptives, or after long periods without sexual activity. Hybridization with extraterrestrials is often cited as the motive or cause behind such pregnancies, a subject slated for detailed discussion down the road. There's an overlap of ufology and folklore where many motifs mirror ancient myths about miscarried or stillborn children becoming supernatural entities, suggesting a psychological or cultural archetype in these experiences. There's physiological and environmental factors such as electromagnetic exposure, toxic gases, stress, neurochemistry, psychosomatic and psychological complexities, trauma, belief, misdiagnosis, malpractice towards understanding some of this phenomena. And then the whole hybridization narrative in itself, once again, Jesus. Libraries worth of information to look into. Once again, it's coming down the road. There's the reoccurring theme of alien intervention in human reproduction between humans, and continues to, it's so much. So scientific skepticism says medical conditions and rational explanations can resolve many claims, but not all of them. And I also promised earlier we talk about some fetus magic, some fetus black magic. I alluded to it earlier, and here's where I deliver. So, I don't know, if you can't or don't want to listen to this, I understand. Skip forward, skip around, whatever. I wish I had a timestamp for you, but I don't, because I don't know how long this is going to take. But there are fascinating parallels between the mysterious phenomena of missing fetuses in UFO abduction lore and the broader cross-cultural magical significance of fetuses throughout history. In ancient Egypt, fetuses removed at around 14-week gestation period were believed to hold special magical power. This timing intriguingly coincides with the 3-month mark commonly reported in UFO-related missing fetus syndrome, or MFS. In Germanic folklore, the concept of thieves' lights, ghostly lights, or will-o'-the-wisps were said to be created from the fingers of unborn children. These lights misled travelers into ambushes by highwaymen. The folklore implies pregnant women's fetuses were targeted for sinister purposes, mirroring themes of child abduction and fetus removal. If you've never heard of a hand of glory, we're looking at that too. That sounds like something you should probably put the safe search on, but it's not. It's an old magical item made from a dead man's hand. But it sounds very similar in theme. There's a Thai magical practice known as the Kumentong, which is a necromantic amulet made from the preserved fetus of an unborn child. Practitioners believe the fetus's soul inhabits the amulet and can be used for either harmful or beneficial magic, usually like a household spirit, helper, assistant of sorts, which parallels European beliefs that souls of unbaptized or dead children become spirits that can aid or haunt the living. Modern practices involving the Kumentong ritual persist today, evidenced by a 2012 arrest in Bangkok. I'm a child. 2012 arrest in Bangkok involving the production of these fetuses coated in gold leaf as lucky charms to be sold on the black market, showing that these ancient magical uses of fetal remains continue in some traditions to this very day. Also, just real quick, want to say apologies for my inappropriate behavior sometimes. This is dark stuff, so I got to get my levity where I can. Thank you. The fetus is a potent magical symbol and symbolic entity across cultures and eras. Magical traditions sometimes involve ritual removal, preservation, or spiritual manipulation of fetuses, often linked to power, luck, or control. These practices echo UFO abduction narratives where fetuses are mysteriously taken or manipulated, suggesting some deep-rooted archetypal or folkloric resonance. In fact, gray aliens very much look like fetuses, so there's that as well. Both UFO lore and magical traditions involve fears and beliefs about the vulnerability of unborn children and the supernatural or otherworldly forces that may threaten or influence them. Once again, that plays into the idea of occult eugenics, which is a whole nother thing down the road. If you want to hear a real life, well, a suspected real life instance of a black magician using supposed fetus parts. Go listen to my Peter Nears episode from back in the day. Let's talk a little bit about hybridization, because just gotta get some of it in here. The mystery of child abductions, missing children and unborn babies in both UFO and fairy lore. It's the challenge of explaining the phenomena, ancient versus modern. I mean, it's sensational. There's sensational ways to approach it. Children taken as food is kind of a parallel. I said we're going some dark places. Children taken as food, sort of a parallel for the fairy time, the tithe to hell I mentioned earlier. Or there could be altruistic purposes such as healing and protection, or genetic experiments geared towards heightening evolution or altering evolution. Fairies taking promising or special children. Once again, that's sort of a occult eugenics kind of thing. The need for breeding stock or special qualities. This is kind of the prevalent theory within the whole hybridization UFO mythology that exists today, in that a lot of people think that some genetic bottleneck of some sort has affected the gray alien specifically, and this is why the entire hybridization program is going on. Or it's an infiltration of humanity, or they're turning us into them, and that's why they are the future us. A lot of different theories on this, but the hybrid theory is basically introduced by Bud Hopkins and later expanded upon by David Jacobs. I'm not going to go into David Jacobs. The key ideas are genetic collection, hybridized children, and abductees who are chosen for special traits. There's so many parallels with the changeling folklore and fairy hybridization. There's the demonic, necromantic parallels as well, with the succubi and the incubi. Why? Once again, biological or physical needs. The aliens may be a dying race, they may be infertile, it may be a children of man situation. There's metaphysical reasons. There's lack of a soul, quest for emotions, spiritual hybridization. We have something they need, whatever that is. It's usually something akin to the soul or emotions in most of the literature. UFO lore. There's New Age interpretations, such as past life agreements, which I sort of alluded to earlier, soul exchanges, soul recycling, etc. Comparison with fairy lore about the ownership of souls and children. There are selected abduction reports illustrating the let's say the basics, the fundamentals of the hybridization theory. There's children who are allegedly born with missions or some special status. I think you know where this is going. Hypnotic regression memories related to healing or genetic sampling. So I'll basically just lay out the hybridization process as succinctly as I can, but alien abduction and hybrid child lore follow the same steps, and that's step one, collection. Aliens allegedly select individuals, often starting around age 7, for a lifetime of genetic material collection, sperm and ova. Males are harvested before sexual maturity, which is puzzling since the sperm is presumably not yet mature or even able to produce. I don't know how that works. Females, however, have their full lifetime supply of eggs from birth, apparently. Methods described include mechanical devices for sperm collection and invasive tubes for egg harvesting. Barney Hill has told some scary fucking stories. So a lot of the shit from... I'm not overly familiar with Whitley Strieber's literature, but I mean, I know the basics, and it's very harrowing shit. Methods described include invasive tubes, and you hook this up to that and plug this in over here, and this will do that, and just it's gratuitous. Some believe childhood abductions serve to test or vet genetic material, with scars interpreted as cell sampling evidence. So when you see the scoop scars, or aka witches marks, this might be indicative of initial genetic testing, etc. And then you have step 2, which is incubation. So alien genetic material is combined with human sperm and or eggs to create a moons over Miami. Gross. No, it's to create hybrid embryos. Embryos are implanted into female abductees or perhaps artificial wombs or alien surrogates. And sometimes natural sexual intercourse with alien entities is reported, leading to pregnancies. But once again, you don't hear that very often with grays because apparently they don't have genitals. Or they do, and they're wearing suits that cover. I don't know how that works. You hear this more in conjunction with reptilians or the Nordics, etc. Step 3 is retrieval. Hybrid fetuses are often removed before birth, sometimes via surgical tools or natural birth, echoing the folklore of fairy abduction of children. These quote-unquote retrievals are another form of paranormal child abduction. Step 4, baby presentation. Parents or abductees are later shown their hybrid offspring, often infants or children with alien-like features, in what is known as baby presentation. Abductees are sometimes forced or strongly encouraged to hold, nurse, or bond with hybrid children despite emotional trauma or physical repulsion. That's a big one. Physical repulsion, to the degree that the parents of these children are often just, no, they just can't do it. It's understandable. It's something deep and instinctual within the mind, and just once, I don't know, we'll probably get deeper into this when we do the further exploration into sexual intercourse with our ultra-terrestrial overlords. There are usually multiple presentations over an abductee's life of their children, and sometimes multiple children. There's incubatoriums and star children. Hybrid infants often look abnormal, described as frail or sickly, with unusual heads and features. Witnesses report distressing dreams and memories about nurturing or giving birth to these hybrids. Hybrid quote-unquote nurseries or quote-unquote incubatoriums reportedly contain rows of jars or containers with embryos or babies or various hybrid entities in segmented stages of development, etc. Think the horror stories of Dulce Base on the 7th subfloor. Something to that effect, I guess. This is where things go into, like, in the UFO abduction literature, this is like the fucking nightmare realms, basically. And while I'm thinking about it, just while I'm editing, I want to bring up the work of Stanislav Grof and his explorations into basically the archetypal imagery of bad trips. It's very interesting overlaps in this stuff. Some abductees have reportedly fathered or birthed hybrid children that remain with the aliens. Some are surreptitiously implanted among human families and raised on Earth. There's a subset of hybrids, called indigo children or star children, are said to live among humans, appearing normal, but possessing extraordinary intelligence, empathy, psychic abilities, or missions given to them by the aliens. Most likely, no, never mind. There are certain aspects of this facet of the hybridization theory that I just find very new agey and insufferable. And that's just me. I don't know. I try not to pass judgment, but I'm only human. The narrative strongly parallels fairy folklore of changelings, abductions, and fairy children. Notable themes such as why are males taken so young for sperm collection? The biology seems inconsistent. Why is invasive cell harvesting necessary in the presence of advanced technology? That appears primitive. Hybrid offspring are often rejected emotionally and physically by abductees. This causes trauma and distrust of babies and children, and I'm sure it's, if these alien hybrid children have emotions, etc., or in a certain developmental stage, I'm sure it fucks them up as well. Parallels to ancient folklore are striking. The incubatoriums and baby presentations and retrievals resemble changeling and fairy abduction myths. Hybrid children's fate vary. Like I said, some stay with aliens, others remain on Earth as special star children or indigo children. The ethics and motivation of aliens in this scenario are, as most things with aliens, very ambiguous. Is this hybridization for survival, genetic diversity, or something else? We don't know. The skepticism towards the extraterrestrial hypothesis in favor of a fairy faith hypothesis in favor of a fairy faith hypothesis, so it's ETH versus FFH, partly stems from frustration with how the UFO community often dismisses fairy lore as mere fantasy, despite the sharing of strikingly similar mythologies. Both ETH and FFH likely miss the mark, constrained by cultural biases or human limitations in comprehending what is truly alien. And that's the thing I see quite often in most ufology, is that as humans, I think it just built into our how we are, but we fail to fully comprehend the definition of the word alien. There's a gentleman by the name of Chris Butler who did a 2014 artwork for the cover, Passport to Magonia, the Jacques Vallée book. Jacques Vallée, goddamn, I always get it mixed up. But this captures artistically, this captures the whole idea very well. It's a depiction of, if you haven't seen it, it's a depiction of a gray alien holding various masks representing space invaders, a demon, fairies, with a hidden arm suggesting a deeper controlling force behind these phenomena. Originally, allegedly, the intention behind or part of the artwork that was left out was that the gray alien holding all these masks was also meant to be some sort of sock puppet, allegedly. That's the apocryphal tale, at least. The UFO and fairy phenomena clearly reflect the same underlying experience, adapting to cultural contexts. For example, changeling myths resemble modern tales of alien-human hybrids. Both involve the replacement of a human child with a grotesque or inhuman substitute. In UFO lore, literal changelings are rare, but appear as clones, duplicates created by aliens to replace humans. Several accounts describe those doubles as heavy, lifeless, or emotionless, echoing fairy changeling stories where the replaced child becomes unnaturally heavy and burdensome. Sometimes they leave behind a decoy baby made of stone or wood. Some abduction cases suggest soul swapping, where a person's soul is taken and placed into a clone or another body, paralleling fairy soul wandering ideas. I haven't come across too much of that in the folklore, but apparently it exists. Such metaphysical substitutions also appear in stories of children or adults who feel replaced or different after encounters. This smacks of capgrass syndrome to me. Perfect psychological write-off, maybe, for such phenomenon. Who knows? Changelings may occur even before birth. Some experiencers report UFO entities removing and replacing unborn babies, implying a prenatal substitution that echoes fairy changeling myths and could provide a new lens on miscarriages and lost twins. This links to the vanishing twin syndrome, or VTS, where one twin disappears during a pregnancy, a phenomenon sometimes reinterpreted in New Age circles as the twin living on in an alien or otherworldly realm, while the surviving twin becomes the changeling. This also incorporates parasitic twin, twin absorption in the womb, things of this nature. Other abduction memories recall bizarre, playful tossing of abductees by strange beings, a motif mirrored in folklore where fairies fight over or throw changeling children like balls. I've heard of this. It's called cat juggling. Reinforcing the deep resonance between UFO experiences and traditional fairy lore. There are parallels between changeling lore and alien abduction hybrids, such as methods of dealing with non-human infants. Historical changeling practices include parents historically used drastic methods like putting changeling babies to flames or abandoning them outdoors in the woods, once again, to force a return or banishment of the fairy substitute. There are modern alien anecdotes. There's a woman named Catherine Wilson, who's an abductee, that describes a quote unquote hospital setting where dead or dying infants are incinerated but can be healed or rejuvenated. So I guess that's a plus. Echoing the old changeling methods of fire as transformative or restorative. Another modern case involved a pregnant woman instructed by her alien contact to place miscarried tissue in a specific outdoor location, reminiscent of abandoning changelings in the wilderness. I don't even want to know the specifics of that story. Size and appearance. Both changelings and hybrids are described as tiny, frail, often malformed or deformed, with unusual body proportions, such as big heads, scaly skin, fragile limbs. Once again, like large heads and eyes, sometimes fully black or with white cornea, or the opposite of, I forget what you call it, the humerus of the eye. Echo, changeling, and fairy lore. While otherworldly infants often had exaggerated features, the weight and build. Hybrids tend to be lightweight and scrawny, which parallels changelings often described as spongy or boneless, wrinkled, quote-unquote wise old faces, or pointed ears reminiscent of elves or fairies that appear in both fairy lore and abduction lore or testimony. This once again all incorporates the rather medieval ways that people back in the day dealt with birth defects, essentially. In both contexts, parents or abductees feel revulsion and rejection towards the offspring, reinforcing this cultural and psychological continuity between fairy folklore and abduction lore. They display such dispositions and behaviors as lethargy and listlessness. Hybrids exhibit weak, sickly behavior, much like changelings, who were often described as insatiable but lethargic. They had massive appetites. They could not stop eating or drinking or feeding. There's a lack of normal infant responses. Abductees report hybrids that do not respond normally to touch or stimuli. They do not cry or grasp and communicate telepathically rather than vocally. There are wise babies, quote unquote. Both changelings and hybrids sometimes appear unnaturally old or knowledgeable, which sort of enforces their inhuman nature. The parents will look at the baby and be like, the thing's plotting against me. So you can see how things such as postpartum depression or postpartum psychosis, things like this, play into the overall themes. There are behavioral changes with age. Hybrids start as quiet and docile. They reportedly become more like adult changelings, sometimes intellectually disabled or socially inept, like the aforementioned hybrids, for example. Once again, go listen to Dr. David Jacobs. I think he's an actual doctor. He's like a professor. David Jacobs on Art Bell, Coast to Coast. The social interaction needs. The hybrids require human physical contact to quote-unquote grow or mature, which is similar to changeling lore, where a mortal's touch was essential. There's spontaneous lactation and nursing, where female abductees sometimes spontaneously lactate and nurse hybrids, mirroring a quote-unquote wet nurse, such as in tales where human women were abducted to nurse fairy infants. There's metaphysical nourishment, where the nursing may be symbolic or energetic rather than literal feeding. In folklore, fairies consumed essence or foison of food, not the food itself. This also, once again, sort of points towards the folklore of vampires, psychic or spiritual parasites. Touch and physical contact, which is essential for hybrid development, echoing the importance of human touch in changeling stories. And just that's a huge part of a baby's development, just in general. And then there's rituals with ointments. Some hybrids are painted or sponged with strange liquids to revitalize them, reminiscent of fairy ointments used to reveal or heal. There are certain ointments that were used over the eyes to allow humans to see the fairy or supernatural realm. as well as reports in, let's say, sexual encounters allegedly taking place between humans and aliens, where there is some sort of phosphorescent goo that remains the next day. You can see under a black light. I believe, oh God, I can't remember her name. There's a book called The Love Bite. Eve Lorgan. Eve Lorgan is another writer who she's the one who I believe first discussed this in a ufology context. However, Father Amino of Sinistrari, who basically wrote the religious textbook on incubi and succubi, talked about finding various fluids on the victims. There's this literature goes way back. I mean, if you're incorporating all this stuff into a folklore spectrum of stuff that took place back in the olden times into today's UFO lore, there's elements of teaching and integration where abductees sometimes describe teaching hybrid social skills. Once again, David Jacobs. Dancing, basic human behaviors, how to dress, what is baseball, how to sit in a recliner. This is why I don't. Hybrids are socially clumsy. They're depicted as naive, awkward, and dependent, requiring ongoing human assistance. This is, of course, out of the baby stage, when they're awkward alien teen years. The idea of alien cowboys or hybrids learning to dance adds a quirky, shitty sitcom element to the otherwise eerie narratives. There's the continuity of mythic themes, though, like the texts highlight how modern alien abduction stories may be cultural evolution or reimagining of changeling folklore. Physical traits, behavioral patterns, caregiving rituals persist across centuries, reshaped by contemporary mythology. You've got the psychological and cultural underpinnings of stories that reflect human anxieties about child loss, alienation, and the unknown. That last one's a biggie. The revulsion towards the other, quote unquote, the others. Infants, echoes, the deep fears about identity, replacement, and the unnatural. Symbolism, the symbolism of touch and nursing, the emphasis on human care, touch, nursing, social teaching underscores a yearning for connection, even in bizarre or alien circumstances, linking the everyday mundane aspects of child rearing with the extraordinary. It's our need for contact with each other. We're social animals, and you know, maybe the aliens are too. They need something from us. Otherwise, why would they be messing with us? So that's the prevailing thought, at least. David Jacobs, Dr. David Jacobs, his idea of hybrids as naive, socially inept, just goofballs from what he makes it sound like. Or they symbolize modern ideas of fear and alienation and technological change and irrelevance, obsolescence, perhaps, and just the unknown future of humanity. And then, once again, you've got Indigo and Star Children. There's Fred, an experiencer from New England, who reported frequent visits starting at age 3 from a tall being with large eyes dressed in a silver jumpsuit. David Bowie just showed up on my TV when I said that. Weird. Synchronicity. On one occasion, this entity, quote-unquote, took Fred through a wall into an alien otherworld where he met his quote-unquote real father. This father explained that although Fred's earthly parents had been chosen to raise him, he was not human. Instead, he was one among many children of extraterrestrial origin who had important tasks to fulfill, quote-unquote. And that at some future critical event, all Star Children would suddenly recognize their true identities and activate, be able to communicate with one another. David Bowie's probably the only legit Star Child. I'll give him that one. I just thought it was weird that he showed up when I was talking about this. When comparing hybrids and changelings, the difference with Indigo and Star Children, who live openly among mortal parents. I'm sure that Indigo and Star Children are very much mortal. That's an odd word to choose, but it should be noted that changelings are almost always viewed with disgust, while indigo and star children are described as deeply empathetic, visionary, intuitive, with a strong sense of mission or purpose, and a very thin veil between the physical and spiritual realms. They are also typically very healthy, precocious, intellectually gifted, quote unquote, resistant to authority, and struggle with the mundane, non creative aspects of life, such as school. That sounds like every child ever. Most of them, at least. Most normal children. Indigo children are essentially synonymous with star children. These children are often believed to be influenced by the paranormal, usually extraterrestrial, and some are considered literal human alien hybrids living with mortal families. This is a long standing narrative paralleling myths of men of renown, demigods born of mortals, and deities from various cultures, such as Hercules, Arjuna from India, or even Jesus Christo of Israel himself. Brad Steiger recounts that in 1969, a woman named Gloria W. from Wisconsin had a sexual encounter with a reptilian being who transformed into, quote unquote, the most beautiful man she'd ever seen. 9 months later, she gave birth to a son, Ramar, Ramar, who grew up to be an intelligent chemistry major and an athlete with, quote unquote, psychic abilities far beyond ordinary. I don't know what the ordinary psychic abilities are, what the baseline counts in this context, but hooray, Ramar. That was hard to say. In 1979, a woman in Dearborn, Michigan gave birth to a girl who exhibited, quote unquote, exceptionally rapid brain development and, quote unquote, potential genius. This child showed fascination with strange lights in the sky, which often returned her interest with repeated appearances. I was about to say, that sounds like just about any kid until the last part there. A 1983 article in Flying Saucer Review detailed a Colorado woman who experienced car trouble, missing time, and a strange abdominal mark. Shortly after, she discovered she was nearly 2 months pregnant during the incident. Though the pregnancy was not carried to term, the child was, quote unquote, more developed than expected and remained very healthy, mentally alert, and precocious. One lifelong abductee told Brett Oldham that her son, pursuing a PhD in 2017, quote, had never broken a bone or suffered a sprain despite active sports participation. He skipped grades in school and had an IQ tested at an IQ tested at 204. So you can retire early, Brett. No sweat, Brett. Got the kid looking out for you. Art from Phoenix recalled nightly visits from a strange woman starting at age 3. She once told him, quote, "You have so much to learn in so little time." Decades later, Art's son was born 2.5 months premature, but quote-unquote walked and talked intelligently at 9 months. By age 4, the son also began receiving visits from his father's mysterious lady, who told him he, quote-unquote, had much to learn in so little time. Like father, like son. The Indigo Children narrative reverses traditional changeling legends, while truly hideous hybrids are hidden away in alien realms or up in the attic. Desirable star children are allowed to remain on Earth among humans. Quote, children often report being told by aliens that these beings are their true parents, wrote Rose Hargrove. Many grow up feeling they do not belong here, sensing Earth is not their real home, or that one or both of their parents aren't biologically related. If I had $1 for every time I felt that, I'd have a lot of dollars. I'm supposed to be part of a space pirate crew, traversing the galaxy, doing badass shit, not trying to flip $1 from a podcast. I'm having fun. In this view, the human parents become the quote-unquote horrifying changelings or alien imposters. Bud Hopkins explains that very young abductees are often trained to believe the woman who raises them on Earth is also a false mother, an imposter, despite their time shared during gestation and nurturing. Gestation and nurturing. I'm going to keep saying that word wrong. Indigo variants include Cerulean blue. No, indigo variants include children who gain superhuman abilities after UFO contact, much like abductees such as Anne Jeffries, who gain powers after time with the fairies. For example, in 1973, a 3-year-old British girl witnessed, quote, 3 large orangey white lights in a triangle formation just outside her window, unquote, after which her intellectual abilities accelerated dramatically. By school age, she stunned visitors by reading newspapers as if an adult. How punky Brewster. Another case involved a 6-year-old boy in Vancouver in 1986 who saw a shining star-like light after an earlier UFO sighting. He reportedly, quote, gained the ability to read his parents' mind, unquote. Good God. There's one thing I don't want to read. It's Ayn Rand in my parents' mind. Despite their rejection, changelings share traits with indigos. According to Doreen Virtue, author of The Care and Feeding of Indigo Children, indigos are restless, have short attention spans, and possess quote-unquote old souls. All characteristics matching cantankerous fairy children. The people I don't want to talk to at a party. They may also be prone to exhaustion and mood swings linked to diet, such as hypoglycemia, causing sudden agitation or irritability. The paranormal talents of indigos mirror those of changelings. Changelings often display an early musical virtuosity, especially on bagpipes or reeds. Oh my goodness. Okay. Bagpipes. What a fitting instrument for these kids. While indigos show artistic talents at a young age. Like changelings who hid their skills in public, indigo children may fail music classes because they can't memorize scales but compose beautiful music privately, Virtue notes. Indigos also share traits with children born from mortal fairy unions. They're headstrong, independent, passionate, and proud. Lady Wilde described beautiful human fairy hybrids as bold, reckless, and quote-unquote strange mystics who gain fame through music and song, but were also difficult to live with. David Bowie. Let's go back to Sasquatch abductions for a bit. Alien abduction and multidimensional entities. There's Sue Jones's account, which features interaction with multiple beings. Her gray alien handler, Zana, as well as quote-unquote para-apes, Taluk and Talil, and even fairy-like beings such as wood sprites and a brownie. Her stories blur lines between UFO entities, cryptids, such as ape-like beings, fairies, and spirits, suggesting a multi-layered other world where these beings coexist or overlap. This challenges strict category boundaries in Fortean research and invites a more integrated view of paranormal phenomena. There's the physical evidence and material interaction. I would love to see some studies done on ectoplasm through this, or just, I don't know, just various paranormal and or ufologically related substances. I would love to see a definitive study done on this. But some UFO encounters, like Jones's, have left physical traces, such as dead vegetation, damaged poles indicating a real physical presence. I assume by damaged poles, they mean telephone poles, or that's what I hope at least. Sasquatch also has tangible evidence. Tracks, hair, scat, nests, setting it apart from many cryptids and paranormal entities. Yet Sasquatch's stranger qualities, such as instances in which they disappear suddenly, glowing eyes, and not in a reversive cat's eye like way, but like self-illuminated eyes, impervious to bullets, telepathic communication. These all are traits that parallel fairy lore more than your average everyday monkey. Sasquatch and fairy parallels. Sasquatch shares many traits with fairies, such as allegedly retreating to subterranean places, association with anomalous lights, and livestock mutilations. I mentioned in my Zermatism episode, there seems to be a trend with many Sasquatch sightings where they are in the accompaniment of a spectral lady in white, a lady of the lake, if you will, a phantom hitchhiker. There are food taboos and distinctive odors similar to those in fairy and UFO lore. There's the ability to incapacitate witnesses remotely, such as with elf shot, or like the aliens who shoot little arrows mentioned earlier, or infrasound. There's a lot of Instances in which Bigfoot and other cryptids, as a matter of fact, dogmen, etc., have been known to radiate some form of infrasound that can stun or incapacitate or paralyze witnesses or encounters or those who encounter them. There's a habitat preference linked to rainfall, reminiscent of wet day fairy activity. Connections with the dead, Quakiutul hairy bukwus presiding over drowned ghosts. Intrigue in human sexuality and hybridity. Traditional quote-unquote wild man fairy figures, such as the Woodwos or the Gilly-Doo, resemble Sasquatch physically and behaviorally. Or if you want to get multicultural with it, the Chinese Yeren or the wild men yokai. Yokai are essentially interchangeable with various fairy lore. There's cultural lore of child abduction by hairy hominids, as mentioned before. Historical and anthropological reports of apes abducting children are widespread. There's African accounts of chimpanzees kidnapping or attacking children. There's American southern folklore warning of the boogers, as mentioned earlier, the hairy man-apes of the mountains. First Nations legends cautioning children against the monkey man or the tsiatko. Parallels to European fairy abduction myths, including the bewitching of children through enchanted berries. Mythic figures like the Tatakle, or owl woman monsters, the Lechuza, that abduct children but do not eat them, instead raising them, once again recalling changeling stories. Deeper prehistoric and mythic layers, such as the once again, I'll refer you to my Zermatism episode, Danny Vendramini's theory of Neanderthals as ancestral predators who hunted, abducted, and cannibalized early humans may underlie modern Sasquatch myths. Vendramini suggests a more beast-like and menacing depiction of Neanderthals, aligning with the fearsome qualities attributed to Sasquatch, also reminiscent of orcs, trolls, ogres, etc. There's also a fascinating convergence of different paranormal and cryptid traditions. Fae, fairies, elves, aliens, Sasquatch, and spirits are not discrete, mutually exclusive entities, but potentially overlapping or interconnected facets of a larger, enigmatic reality. Physical manifestations, such as UFO landing traces, Sasquatch physical evidence, phosphorescent goo, as mentioned before, ectoplasm. Yeah, ectoplasm, that's what that is. Coexists with intangible paranormal experiences, indicating that these beings can interact with the material world in selective or partial ways, whether that be voluntary or involuntary. The folklore of child abduction runs through fairy, cryptid, and alien narratives, suggesting a universal mythic theme about vulnerable children, identity, and hybridization. The other world, whether described as an alien spacecraft, fairy realms, spirit dimension, subterranean caverns, etc., it's a liminal space where normal physical laws bend and where human-animal hybrids or supernatural children emerge. There's a strong thread of quote-unquote otherness, the others, the other, and alienation in these tales. Children are taken away, replaced, or marked as different, i.e. changelings, hybrids, indigos, star children, cambions, as mentioned before, like Merlin. The material traces, such as damaged vegetation or telephone poles. Okay, it was telephone poles. Woo! Footprints, livestock mutilation. These all hint at complex interaction between these beings and our physical world, reinforcing the reality of the phenomenon beyond mere folklore or delusion. The presence of quote-unquote para-apes in some of these abduction scenarios and fairy beings in one narrative strongly challenges rigid scientific or folkloric categorization, urging a multidisciplinary approach to such mysteries. There's documented child Sasquatch abductions. The aforementioned young Dennis, I forget his last name, I'm a shitty human being, supposedly being stolen by a bear or witnessed being thrown over the shoulder of a bear-like creature and then absconded with. While some claim Sasquatch mostly appear to young children and sexually mature women, many sightings involve adult men, particularly outdoorsmen, lumberjacks, salt of the earth fellas. Travis Walton comes to mind for some reason. but once again, this is all a crossover. However, Sasquatch do seem especially interested in children and young women. For instance, the famous Skookum cast was reportedly obtained after researchers played sounds of children laughing and infants crying. Numerous reports describe Sasquatch closely watching or approaching children, attracted by their sounds and presence. And this is how you get Harry and the Hendersons. Historical and modern accounts reveal Sasquatch stalking, grabbing, or abducting children across North America and beyond. In the 1970s, the Momo sightings in Missouri, a large hairy creature, was frequently spotted near children. In Pennsylvania, during the UFO Bigfoot flap, a girl reported a hairy figure staring through her window. Multiple cases in the early 20th century described children followed or grabbed by ape-like or hairy creatures. Some attempts to abduct children were thwarted by adults or animals. Apparently, dogs and Sasquatch have a long storied rivalry, which brings the dog man question into play and goes into complex places we don't have time for in this particular episode. Others succeeded, such as a 1602 French shepherdess who vanished and reportedly called from a monster's lair, or a 1969 disappearance, the aforementioned Dennis Martin in the Great Smoky Mountains, where witnesses saw a large upright figure carrying something was presumed to be young Dennis Martin. A detailed 1857 story tells of a boy captured by a quote-unquote wild man with glowing eyes and claws, dragged underground into a phosphorescent cave decorated like a fairy realm. And inside, the boy sees a captive, beautiful woman and hears eerie music. After receiving a warning from the woman, the boy escapes by digging his way out with a knife. Though likely exaggerated or fictional, this tale strongly echoes European fairy abduction folklore, including subterranean layers, magical music, and captive mortals aiding escapes, showing striking parallels between Sasquatch abduction and ancient fairy legends. Lures, mimicry, and the imitation of crying babies and human voices once again show up in Sasquatch abduction lore. Sasquatch are reported to mimic human voices as the aforementioned skinwalkers and Wendigo, including calling dogs by name to lure them into the woods for predation, including the alleged siege at Honobia incident, according to one Oklahoma witness. This is compared to fairy lore where children are beckoned into forests. There's broader vocal mimicry. A Chinese wild man, once again the Yeren, was observed imitating diverse animal and infant sounds. Crying baby sounds are widely reported in Sasquatch encounters, which is very weird, as well as other paranormal phenomena such as ghosts, UFOs, fairies. This crying baby motif is fairly common enough to be notable in folklore globally. It shows up in a lot of places. Among the Tlingit, a kushtaka makes babies cry that foretell sickness or death, akin to the banshee's wail. I could be wrong on this. I believe the kushtaka is it's the were otter or the otter man. It's an aquatic rodent shapeshifter being. Irish fairy lore similarly links babies crying to fairies' night gatherings. The Catawba tribe describes quote-unquote wild Indians emitting wailing infant sounds. There is a scientific explanation. Babies' cries instinctively trigger intense attention or fight or flight responses in human brains, even in those without children, making it a very effective lure. Similar to mermaid folklore, where siren songs, sometimes described as infant-like cries, lure victims to their doom. Motivations behind it and the hybridity? It could be cannibalism. Child abduction. Indigenous traditions often depict Sasquatch or similar beings as cannibals or abductors of children for food. Numerous Native American names exist for quote-unquote cannibal giants across multiple tribes throughout history. Other possible motivations include wild men abducting young women for other purposes, such as slave labor in the case of the Nisqually, or raising them to help gather food in the case of the Kwakiutl, or other. We'll just go with other. There's learning human skills as well, analogous to the folklore of orangutan like King Louis abducting Mowgli for the knowledge of fire. There's the Indonesian Ebugogo and Guatemalan Sisamite legends, which suggest man-apes kidnap humans to learn skills like fire-making or speech. Various tales from Japan, Nepal, home of the Yeti, Canada, Sasquatch, and Slovenia, plus other regions tell of girls abducted, sometimes bearing offspring to these creatures. These offspring are often described as malformed, hairy, or strange hybrids who rarely survive long. Nephilim. The motif of the ape as indecent assaulter, we'll say, kidnapper, is a reoccurring artistic and folkloric theme tracing back centuries all the way to the Tang Dynasty in China. So the story occurs there. Once again, see my Zermatism episode for further elucidation upon this. Changeling and Sasquatch parallels in the Arctic and other folklore, like among the Russian Arctic Chukchi. Changelings are humans taken by wind who become hairy man beasts. There's Saint Onufrius, who is a wild man changeling hybrid. This blends changeling lore with wild man imagery, born under unusual circumstances, surviving a fire test, living as a hairy hermit, possibly with otherworldly, angelic, or extraterrestrial undertones. Saint Christopher in his cynocephalous dog form. Once again, Dogman rears his head, literally. Sasquatch human hybrid offspring resembling changelings, such as being sickly or malformed children who die young. Physical traits such as excessive hair, long arm, ape-like faces. Parallel changelings, alien hybrids, and fairy children, such as in much of the fairy lore, the fairy changelings or decoy replacements will often have full beards on a baby, which is cute, but malevolent. There are modern parallels. Thomas K. Burnett's case. Burnett's alleged Sasquatch encounter included abduction, alien-like medical procedures such as a syringe to the heart, and the appearance of sickly Sasquatch children left in the woods, which very much echo changeling stories where a fairy child is left and the human's own child is taken. Sasquatch reportedly can disguise themselves as logs or stumps. I've seen a lot of videos of this. Freezing in place, changing their texture, an ability unheard of in mammals but seen in cephalopods, which also evokes fairy glamour or magical concealment and shapeshifting. Cephalopods, oh boy, I got something down the road on that too. Examples include a Sasquatch turning into a log in full view, and humorous stories of witnesses unknowingly taking logs home as furniture, to later be surprised quite thoroughly, I'm sure, when they revert to their original form. The mimicry and baby cries are not just random traits, but deeply embedded in folklore worldwide as powerful attractors of human attention and traps. The persistence across different beings, from fairies to aliens to Sasquatch, suggests a shared symbolic or psychological function for this trait. Child abduction and hybrid offspring myths reinforce fears of the wild, the unknown, and the dangers lurking at the forest's edge, blending folklore with cryptid sightings and alleged encounters. The changeling motif, the tropes, the narrative, often involving substitution, sickly offspring, and fairy or supernatural intervention, parallels Sasquatch abduction stories and hybrid offspring accounts, suggesting a common mythological substrate or an archetype reinterpreted in different cultural contexts. I forget the name of the older gentleman who has probably one of the most famous Sasquatch abduction stories. I believe he's a prospector, and as a young man, he was abducted by a family of Sasquatch and was able to facilitate his escape by feeding the large alpha male Sasquatch a bunch of tobacco snuff. It made him sick, and he was able to make his escape this way. But I believe he mentions that he eventually was of the impression that the sole reason for his kidnapping was to provide a husband, if you will, to to the female Sasquatch in the group who was not betrothed already. Fairy-like camouflage and glamours attributed or ascribed to Sasquatch highlight a supernatural or otherworldly dimension beyond the mere animalistic, undiscovered ape traits. The connection to alien abduction lore in modern Sasquatch stories suggests a convergence of mythologies of traditional folkloric motifs blending with modern UFO culture. Now, also, let me get into creepy territory. Once again, this is probably some of the creepier shit. Actually, I think from here on out, it's probably most of the creepiest shit. We're going to talk about bedroom intruders and quote-unquote crib creepers. King Charles I of England was reportedly a very irritable baby. According to legend, this irritability might have stemmed from a particular event. One late night in Dunfermline Palace, the quiet was broken by the cries of Charles's nurse, who woke his father, King James, of Bible fame. The nurse recounted, quote, "An old man-like figure entered the room, threw his cloak over the prince's cradle, then pulled it close as if carrying away the cradle, the child, and everything else. I feared it was something uncanny," unquote. From that moment, some believed Charles to be a changeling. This 17th century story may be one of the earliest accounts of a disturbing category of nocturnal visitors that Joshua Cutchin calls crib creepers. It's a very astute, well-picked name, creepy as shit. These are beings that appear in children's bedrooms. I'm sure you've seen the occasional paranormal activity-esque video on YouTube here or there of strange things occurring in babies' cribs. Babies standing up on edges, reaching for things, or just hands that appear out of nowhere, and faces within the nooks and crannies of between the bars of crib. If you're interested, seek it out. It's fucking creepy. Although most of it, I don't know. I hesitate to give much of it validity, but it's still creepy as shit. But these are beings that appear in children's bedrooms. And although these visitors mainly observe infants, their presence often hints at child abduction. In 1989, UFO researcher Joseph Nyman was told by 6 out of 9 lifelong experiencers that they remembered, quote, being infants in their cribs or bassinets with a special entity watching over them, unquote. Ugh. Typically, crib creepers don't frighten babies. In fact, infants are often unaware of them or even amused. Which, if there's any infantile trait I would love to retain, be the ability to laugh at the creepiest shit in the world. But I digress. One couple told researcher Graham Conway, founder of UFO British Columbia, that after putting their son to bed, they heard laughter and chatter. When they checked, they found their child, quote, standing in his crib, happily talking to someone or something invisible. Once again, this brings to mind tales of imaginary friends. Are they imaginary? Or the story of Purple Mommy. And I'm not going to tell you the Purple Mommy story. If you want to know about Purple Mommy, look it up. One of the creepier fucking things I've ever heard. In some traditions, Lilith was said to target smiling babies, tickling their feet. Mothers were thus advised to tap their children 3 times on the nose if caught giggling or smiling in their sleep. Wipe that smirk off your face. Starting early. Some historical and modern examples of crib creepers include, in the late 1800s at Delaware's Quincy John homestead, a dinner party witnessed a quote-unquote pale woman soothing a baby in its crib. She wore a white silk dress, had a pearl comb in her hair, and soft leather slippers. After silently joining the guests for dinner, she vanished without a trace. This recalls folklore of mothers held by the Fae who returned to care for their infants. This strange woman showed a unnatural interest in the baby and then joined the dinner party and said nothing the entire time and left without a word. Yikes. One night in 1974, a babysitter in Wauwatosa, Wisconsin, felt compelled to check on a child. Inside the nursery, she saw a small gnome-like figure, 2 feet tall, dressed in breeches, suspenders, and a vest, dancing by the crib. She quietly picked up the baby and left. Good call. UFO researcher Jorge Martin recorded that in December 1979, a Puerto Rican family experienced several home invasions by 3 short, green humanoids. On one occasion, the beings were seen staring at a baby's crib before disappearing when confronted. Ugh. A witness in Derbyshire, told fairy researcher Marjorie Johnson she saw, quote, a tiny man with a pointed beard, a tunic, and a small hat tilted to one side, unquote, near her daughter's cot. Startled by her gaze, he grabbed the curtains and fled out of the window like Quicksilver. In March 1981, Selena Quayle saw a dark figure by her daughter's playpen. Despite her refusal, the figure claimed, she is part of us. Fuck. Following a UFO sighting on July 15, 1989, in Addingham, UK, a 6-year-old girl reported a small figure climbing into her bedroom. Described as having a, quote, thin white face and angry eyes, unquote. Later, the figure returned with a, quote, female companion, unquote, and both vanished after silently staring. Notably, an Iron Age fairy ring fort lies just outside this town. In September 1994, a woman in Tres Piedras, New Mexico, claimed 3 grays stood by her baby before leaving the room and departing in a silver disc-shaped ship. UFO researcher extraordinaire Albert Rosales, this guy's fucking awesome, interviewed a Sydney witness who in late 1996 saw a, quote, large-headed, insect-eyed, unquote, creature with small limbs watching her son in his cot. The creature seemed aware she saw it, then vanished. These stories often imply child abduction, or at least surveillance, prior to kidnapping, perhaps. Some may indicate recent returnees from abduction or failed attempts. For example, in 1963, a young man visiting his nephew in Voronezh, Russia, saw a small, hairless head peek from the infant's room. After it disappeared, the baby was found crying but unharmed while a dark shape fled. God. Creepy. Fucking creepy. Some experiencers believe crib creepers enhance children's mental abilities. Ufologist Marilyn Henry Childs claimed her earliest memories involve an imaginary, quote-unquote, playmate in her crib who taught her astronomy, math, and languages. Those maths don't math. Alongside full-bodied beings, many abductees recall playful visits by orbs of light in childhood bedrooms. Once again, orbs of light. The orbs of light are all over this shit. These visits, usually between ages 2 and 6, often involve games. Ginny Randalls, also excellent researcher, described the orbs as glowing spheres between tennis and basketball size, entering children's rooms to quote-unquote play. Based on this, Randalls proposed the quote-unquote psychic toy theory. Just as children use toys to develop skills, these light orbs might stretch the child's mind and acceptance of paranormal phenomena, potentially training psychic abilities linked to alien contact. So, something to think about 3 a.m. when you can't sleep. Just make sure you know where your children are. Let's transition a bit now into Missing 411. In September 1880, David Lang vanished without a trace from a small farm in Sumner County, Tennessee. His disappearance occurred openly, witnessed by his wife and several others. He simply disappeared while walking. Rumors circulated of a large circular indentation on the grass where he had stood, and those who stepped into this depression claimed they could faintly hear Lang's voice carried on the wind. This story is certainly intriguing. However, the accounts of David Lang and similar tales involving boys named Oliver Lurch, Larch Thomas, Oliver Larch, Oliver Thomas, and other such derivations thereof are generally regarded as fabrications. Most scholars agree these stories were inspired by Ambrose Bierce's 1888 short story, The Difficulty of Crossing a Field, which features a planter named Williamson who vanished from a field near Selma, Alabama in July 1854. Interestingly enough, in 2002, composer David Lang created an opera based on Bierce's story. Even more interestingly, I plan on doing a future episode regarding the mysterious disappearance of Bierce himself and its possible connections to the mystery airships of 1896 and 1897. Surprise. Other stories from the same era that resemble Bierce's narrative are often presented as factual. For instance, on Christmas Eve 1909, a Welsh boy was reportedly, quote, levitated from snow-covered ground, unquote, with his footprints ending near a well. This is not to suggest that genuine disappearances do not occur. Once again, Ambrose Bierce himself disappeared in Mexico in 1914, but reports resembling Bierce's story and dating within a 25-year period of its publication should be treated with skepticism. Another quick little known detail about Ambrose Bierce: he was a secret agent for the Treasury Department, which used to be pretty fucking high up there back in the day before we had all of our other intelligence agencies come along. Just throwing that out there. Anyways, a more recent case from Russia adds a curious detail. In January 1959, siblings Alesha, 10, and Karya Sorkin, 12, went outside to play in freshly fallen snow near Moscow but never returned. Their footprints abruptly stopped about 20 feet from the front door. Despite thorough searches by authorities, no trace of the children was ever found. The tracks simply ended. Notably, this disappearance took place just after a snowstorm, an apparently minor detail that might hold significant clues. If you're familiar with the missing 411 lore, freak snowstorms, quote-unquote freak snowstorms, precipitation, storms of any kind showing up just as soon as someone's gone missing to interfere with the search, essentially. It's a reoccurring instance within the overall narrative of these events. The fog as well. The Crow Nation in the western United States recounts the tale of the quote-unquote storm child. During a fierce midwinter storm, a thick black cloud settled on a mountaintop. From this cloud, quote, 2 long arms deposited an infant down upon the earth, unquote. Before the cloud disappeared, an elderly woman who hadn't borne children for years experienced sudden labor pains and gave birth to a female child green as the grass. The Crow people believe this child was the same one delivered by the storm cloud, naming her Storm Child. Adverse weather often coincides with mysterious vanishings, especially those involving children. Many missing child cases include strange mists or fogs. According to Ukrainian researcher Andrew Zabava, in 1914, a family cabin in Russia was approached by an unnatural fog that settled in a nearby field. The family realized this was exactly where their son and daughter had been playing moments before. The children vanished without a trace, and their parents believed they had been taken by quote-unquote wood goblins. In 1968, 11-year-old Graciela de Lourdes Jimenez was outside in a Cordoba, Argentina suburb when a white mist appeared on the path. It slowly moved toward her until she could no longer see the houses or move or call out. Later, she found herself in Plaza España in central Cordoba. Afterwards, she suffered chills and uncontrollable sobbing. Ruben Walter Rusin, age 11, was preparing to go downstairs with his aunt and grandmother when a dark cloud enveloped him in the hallway. Missing for 2.5 hours, he was later found in the same corridor, his cheeks marked by pale red circles and his body unusually warm. He recalled being paralyzed and placed on something soft and warm, with an unseen entity urging him, talk, talk. Very strange. Literature scholar Martin Houvel noted that storms linked to journeys to the other world are not always snowstorms. They can be wind, rain, hailstorms with thunder. If we're talking Middle Eastern mythology and folklore, sandstorms. Passing through such magical storms is akin to diving into a spring or lake's waters, which in many Irish tales is how one enters the other world. Mist and fog are strongly associated with Fae folklore, but they also feature in modern alien abduction reports. Such anomalous fogs often surround cars, as in the October 27, 1974 incident involving John Day and his family near Aveley, England. A greenish fog reportedly engulfed their car, causing missing time and, according to hypnotic regression sessions, an alien abduction. UFO interiors are frequently described as misty or foggy, and some claim extraterrestrial craft can even appear as smoke. Some, such as members of the not too far back in history Love Has Won cult, were peddling the idea that they can somehow project clouds outside of the ship as a form of disguise. I'm sure that idea goes way farther back, actually, but that's the most recent place I remember hearing that idea. One trucker recalled encountering a thick smoke-like cloud on the road without any visible source. The next morning, he noticed unusual marks on his foot and grew suspicious. The cloud was neither smoke nor fog. let's really dive into the missing 411 here. So, in early 2012, retired police officer and detective David Paulides published the first book in what would become his widely recognized Missing 411 series. His research began after discovering that the United States National Park Service surprisingly does not maintain an ongoing record of visitors who have gone missing within national parks. And this revelation led him to identify troubling clusters of disappearances concentrated in specific geographic locations. Pontius Pilates' work has become one of the most discussed topics in contemporary Fortean phenomena. While his research is too extensive to fully detail here, he has authored 6 books, I believe, on the subject as of now. Several consistent patterns he's uncovered are important to highlight, although it should also be noted that critics of his Missing 411 series, of which there are many, find his specific criteria for what constitutes a Missing 411 case can at times be biased or myopic. Conversely, however, a good deal of the cases he provides are genuinely weird as shit. This is largely due to him only ever coyly alluding to potential various causes without ever truly adhering to one particular theory or ascribing any one specific cause to these events. It's largely the fan base that provides the bulk of the speculation, which in all honesty is pretty much the biggest part of the fun. Thus, you have the birth of certain pet theories, such as feral people, etc. There's one particular story about a robot grandma. I don't have time to cover it here. It's pretty popular. If you're unfamiliar with it, track it down. It is a strange one. Over several years, Paulides noticed that certain areas, especially national parks, are prone to strange disappearances, unexplained deaths, and incidents of missing time involving missing individuals. Typically, those who leave no trace behind. When bodies are recovered, they often display odd behaviors before death and are frequently found in remote or hard-to-reach places. In the rare cases where missing persons are found alive, they most often cannot recall their whereabouts during their disappearance, despite extensive searches by family, friends, and authorities. Perhaps they should try hypnotic regression therapy. Just kidding. Paulides notes that inclement weather often coincides with disappearances, usually appearing during or shortly after the event and hampering the search efforts. For example, after Lowell Lynn disappeared in 1957 on Mount Rainier, a storm dumped 48 inches of snow in the search area. Similarly, in 1941, a major storm obstructed the search for a missing 4-year-old boy in Camp Sacramento, California, by swelling creeks and rivers. He also reports that survivors are often found in or near water sources, such as creeks, riverbeds, swamps, frequently unconscious or semi-conscious and unable to remember details from their time missing. Victims are commonly discovered without shoes or clothing, sometimes in places that have already been thoroughly searched. Berries and swamps often appear in these cases. Additionally, many victims are found far beyond normal search and rescue distances, sometimes traveling thousands of feet uphill or miles away from where they were last seen. So just as mentioned earlier in some of the previous cases covered, the distance traversed by these missing people, especially in the case of children, is just outrageously improbable. Additional reoccurring features include dogs refusing to track the missing persons, disappearances occurring near boulder fields, a disproportionate number of male victims, and many victims of German descent wearing bright clothing. The whole German descent thing, very strange. It reminds me of a book written by Jason Reza Giorgiani called Closer Encounters, which I highly recommend. It's quite possibly the best. Well, I don't want to spoil it, but Nazi UFOs. The bodies are frequently discovered face down in the dirt, sometimes in varying states of undress. Once again, this could also be attributed to potential paradoxical undressing in cases of hypothermia. In some cases, their clothes are neatly folded beside them. For example, in 1964, 2-year-old Kenneth Edwards was found dead 7 miles from his parents' camp in California without his jacket and sweatshirt, lying face down on a rocky slope. In April 1952, 2-year-old Keith Parkins disappeared while visiting relatives in Ritter, Oregon. 19 hours later, he was found face down 12 miles away, despite typical search guidelines suggesting toddlers are usually located within 2 miles. He had no memory of the incident and was treated for exposure. He's one of the lucky ones who lived. 2-year-old David Allen Scott disappeared near Mono Village, California in 1957. He was found dead in a boulder field, wearing only a t-shirt and a single sock. He traveled 3,000 feet higher in elevation than his last known location. In 1973, mentally disabled 2-year-old Jimmy Duffy vanished near Wenatchee Lake, Washington. His disappearance happened under mysterious circumstances with no footprints or tracks despite a comprehensive search. In 1976, 2-year-old Hector Gonzalez Portes disappeared from his bed in northwest Spain and was found 8 kilometers away in the mountains 11 hours later. A doctor concluded the child could not have walked there, especially since he was found wearing sandals he had left under his bed. In 1977, 18-month-old Lee Littlejohn and his 2-year-old cousin disappeared from their aunt's home during a heavy rainstorm in Redding, California. The cousin was found after an hour but was unable to explain Lee's whereabouts. Lee's body was discovered the next day 3/4 of a mile up a steep hill, missing his shoes and socks. Paulides has documented hundreds of similar cases, all sharing these strange characteristics. His work has fascinated paranormal enthusiasts globally, leading to a range of theories such as UFO abductions, Sasquatch, government conspiracies, or serial killers. However, none of these explanations adequately fit all the facts. For instance, can Sasquatch control the weather? Well, can he? He's one of those shaman Sasquatches I was talking about earlier, possibly. Shaman. Shaman! Or do aliens hang around berry patches? One overlooked explanation ties back to folklore. In 1953, a girl in County Mayo, Ireland found herself trapped on a hilltop by a quote-unquote invisible wall. When she tried to leave, she would end up walking in the opposite direction, and a nearby search party could neither see nor hear her. After some time, the invisible barrier disappeared. This story reflects old fairy folklore. The only existing tradition that matches all of Paulides' missing 411 criteria is fairy lore. The association with bad weather, a common fairy abduction method, or proximity to boulder fields and water, strange behavior of animals, notably dogs, refusing to enter the woods, all align with traditional fairy beliefs. Fairies are also known to favor abducting boys, consistent with the male preponderance in Paulides' cases. Bloodhounds often refuse to track in these areas, mirroring folklore that dogs both see and fear fairies. One witness in Massachusetts reported an encounter with a pukwudgie, a fairy-like creature from Wampanoag lore, where both he and his dog were frozen with fear. I believe this is outside of the Bridgewater Triangle. Many fairies in various traditions possess the ability to levitate, which could explain the seemingly impossible distances traveled by victims or why they are found in areas previously searched. Welsh fairies, for instance, were known to fly freely. There are further parallels in clothing. Many missing 401 victims wear bright colors. Red is a common one. And fairy lore includes warnings about offending the fae with certain colors. Some victims are found with clothes removed or folded neatly beside them. This resembles customs in fairy tales and even in Hawaiian folklore, where the quote-unquote night marchers, spectral processions associated with the folkloric equivalent of fairies in Hawaii, require onlookers to lie face down or remove clothing as a form of respect or protection to the spirits. Some missing 401 cases even evoke changeling myths. One famous case involved a 3-year-old boy near Mount Shasta who described a double, no soda jokes, who described a double of his grandmother talking to him in an underground cave filled with lifeless robots. See, this one. This mirrors changeling stories involving doppelgangers, underground realms, and abandonment. Another chilling tale is that of Pauline Picard, a 2-year-old who disappeared from her farm in Brittany, France, in 1922. Weeks later, a girl matching her description appeared 300 miles away, but behaved strangely, unable to recognize her family or speak their dialect. Soon after, a undressed, stabbed, decomposed body with neatly folded clothes nearby was found close to the family farm in an area that had already been searched, deepening the mystery. While it remains uncertain whether fairies or another unknown force are responsible, the close overlap between missing 411 patterns and fairy folklore suggests these ancient beliefs might shed some light on these baffling disappearances. One of the more potentially unsettling components of many so-called missing 411 stories, as often recounted by those who were previously missing but eventually made their way back to civilization, is that they'd encountered quote-unquote strange people who'd watch them from a distance and quietly talk amongst themselves while either hiding behind trees and rocks or seemingly living in the wilds. When the missing person would approach them to ask these people for help, directions, etc., they'd simply ignore them as if they weren't even there, or move away. Just walk away. Equally strange, if not more so, are accounts of people who are lost that would all of a sudden encounter men dressed in suits and ties who would just immediately just show up out of nowhere. As soon as they turn around, bam, there was a well-dressed man in a suit and tie. But once again, when these people make their way back to civilization, when they are found again, their memories are hazy, foggy, shot to shit. There's also been some talk of hearing metal latches or doors banging shut, then echoing through the vast silence of the forest, specifically as noted in the case of the 82-year-old hunter Tom Messick, who mysteriously vanished and even inexplicably had the FBI brought in on his case, to which the reasons for still remain unknown. Also, for instance, is the 2012 incident of one Linda Arteaga, who, ironically enough, went missing in the wilds of Arkansas for 5 days while practicing her survival skills and techniques. Initially, she was lost with her brother, but the two became separated, and ultimately he would make it out, and by then assumed that she had as well. But she was reported missing to the authorities, and they quickly expressed doubts that she was even still alive. But eventually, she'd find her way out of the woods. She was found scratched up and bruised and claims to have subsisted on nuts and berries while licking water off leaves. However, it was also during this time that Linda claims, although she may not have been thinking clearly, she apparently wasn't the only person out there. Quote, "I would see people. I would ask for help and they'd act like they didn't even hear me," unquote. She remembers them looking right at her and not saying a thing. Quote, "These people were hiding in the bushes. They were weird people, very weird people," Arteaga said. While recuperating at the hospital, her doctor suggested she may have ate something toxic that caused her to hallucinate. However, they would also state that she, quote, "seems very oriented and appropriate in conversation," unquote, and had been very consistent in her recounting the ordeal. However, accounts of those who have been lost and found only grow stranger from here, as there's one particular incident as reported by Jerome Clark by way of the once again infinitely awesome Beyond Creepy channel on YouTube. One that recounts the experience of a man by the name of Mike Lesignan, I believe that's how you say it, who in June of 1976 ended up lost while hiking in the Colorado mountains. After failing to return home, his wife reported him missing, and on June 9th, both first responders as well as search and rescue had both set out to look for him. This included air support provided by both police helicopter and a military airplane. No trace of Mike was found and the search was called off. On Sunday, June 13th, a pair of cyclists heard a man calling for help and found Mike, who was at the bottom of a 700-foot lookout. They alerted the authorities and Mike was rescued. During an ambulance ride, a completely lucid Mike laid out his story to Sheriff Eugene Kiefer about something he saw on his first night in the woods. At around 10 p.m., after having gathered a pile of pine boughs to sleep on, is when he observed a pair of rectangular objects float down from the clouds and land at a nearby creek. Thinking they might be rescue helicopters, Mike walked over to them and attempted to talk to the crew. However, he quickly realized that this was not a rescue team. They did not speak English and seemed to only whisper to one another in some unintelligible language. While attempting to communicate with them, Mike began to notice there was something very off about these quote-unquote people and their appearance. Their eyes were wide set and spaced differently from anyone he'd ever seen before, and their clothes were highly unusual as well. He was also surprised at how many of them there were, roughly a dozen to 24 perhaps, men, women, and children. They appeared as if they'd begun setting up camp and quickly gave off the distinct impression that Mike was not welcome and that it would be in his best interest to leave immediately. So he quickly did just that. Throughout the night, he heard what sounded like horses and dogs, and the next morning, when he returned to the same area, they were all gone. The sheriff suggested that Mike may have been delirious and that these quote unquote people he encountered were in fact members of the search party. Thanks, Sheriff. In another, much stranger case, a couple hiking out in the woods of Maine stumbled into something that sounds like it came straight out of a straight up lysergic grindhouse fever dream. As recounted in an April 1986 issue of the Pittsburgh Press, 32-year-old Daniel Kelly of Boston and 32-year-old Donna Gioco of Somerville, Massachusetts, were recovering in a Bangor, Maine hospital after a terrifying ordeal in the woods. They'd both apparently gotten lost while hiking and suddenly found themselves being hunted by a man that was wearing, quote, big floppy bunny ears and carrying a walkie-talkie, unquote, as well as a gun, which he used to shoot at the couple. Daniel was apparently struck by one of the bullets as they attempted to outrun and outmaneuver this man while running through the forest at night. Donna would later tell the police that they'd eventually stumbled onto a scene of mutilated dead animals, and then even more horrific, there were people out in the woods laying down on sheets and hanging upside down in the trees. The couple were eventually found on Sunday, March 30th by an ice fisherman, sitting on an isolated road on the outskirts of the woods. Police would later state that they found quote-unquote drugs on the couple, but never specified whether these were prescription or illicit drugs. But regardless, Daniel was still being treated for a gunshot wound. And the final case, recounted in this video, is an article titled, Why She Can't Talk About the Horror on the Marsh, in which both police and search and rescue recount these strange things they found while looking for a missing woman. In March of 1978, 31-year-old Claudette Chouzon had gone horse riding not far from her farm out in the wild marshlands of southern France. She was riding one horse while taking another and her dog along for a walk as well. She planned to camp out during this extended ride and said she'd be gone for at least 2 days, but when she failed to return after this time, her mother asked several neighboring farmers if they would help to assist in organizing a search. Later that day, a party of 30 men rode out in an attempt to pick up her trail. The first discovery came a day later, several miles north of Claudette's farm. It was the horse she'd been riding, ironically named Lucky, and its body had been savagely ripped open. They later found the other horse, frightened but none the worse for wear. However, there was still no sign of Claudette. The searchers began to wonder if whoever killed the horse may have gotten to her as well. It was at this point that law enforcement joined in on the search. It wouldn't be until the 5th day that they came across some of her clothing in a burned-out glade about 100 miles north of the farm. A burned-out glade in a circular shape. On the 7th day, a woman called the police saying she'd seen a strange girl near the roads. The police would find Claudette sitting on the ground covered in mud, practically catatonic. Her dog was beside her, hungry and exhausted. Authorities theorized she'd been attacked and assaulted, but a later medical examination at the hospital revealed that this was not the case. In fact, according to the doctors, there were no signs to indicate that she'd been physically assaulted in any way. Police would later tell the press that they had no idea what occurred out in the woods, but that the wounds on the dead horse were horrific. There were no bites or claw marks, so it wasn't attacked by an animal. Nor did they have any explanation as to what happened in the burned-out glade where they found some of her clothing. They simply and quite unsatisfyingly stated that she was, quote, confronted by something outside of her experience, unquote. These accounts are merely a small handful of what those who ended up lost in the woods and survived the ordeal were able to communicate after the fact, essentially illustrating that it's perhaps better to have never come back at all. I'll try to include this video in the show notes so you can see it for yourself. So, closing out, this is much of the more theoretical stuff. Let's see. Before exploring deeper theories, it's important to recap the key patterns established throughout this discussion. We've already emphasized the recurring presence of altered states of consciousness, such as trances and accounts of supernatural child abductions. There's also a persistent association between developmental disorders, particularly autism, and stories of fairy changelings. These observations echo in David Paulanda's Missing 411 research, which frequently features the unexplained disappearance of developmentally disabled individuals. Many children who reportedly returned from time spent with fae or fairy or elf beings emerged changed, imbued with extraordinary abilities and heightened spiritual awareness. These traits are mirrored in contemporary alien abduction narratives and in the accounts of alleged human-alien hybrids or so-called star or indigo children. A consistent thread across folklore and modern accounts is the idea that beings from the other world seek something uniquely human. They need something from us. Though their exact motivations remain unclear, stories from around the world suggest these entities rely on humanity for their survival or evolution, whether it's fairies requiring milk and vitality, aliens harvesting genetic material, or witches seeking infants for rituals. The Dogon people of Mali, of Sirius B fame, provided a particularly compelling perspective. Researcher Laird Scranton explains that according to their beliefs, quote, universes come in pairs. Our material world has a non-material twin we cannot easily perceive. This non-material universe holds perfect knowledge but lacks the capacity for action, while our world possesses agency but incomplete understanding. Through subtle signs, vivid dreams, animal behavior, synchronicities, the non-material realm offers guidance. Those attuned to these signs become increasingly aware of the non-material realm, while others remain oblivious. From this viewpoint, supernatural abductors require human agents to act on their behalf, most notably children. But why children? Though it may sound cliche, children's brains are indeed far more adaptable than adults. A 2-year-old has nearly double the synaptic connection of an adult. As Professor William Mosier of Wright State University notes, quote, the first 3 years of life are critical for brain development, marked by rapid synapse formation. After this period, brain development typically involves pruning rather than creating new connections, pruning and shearing. A rich, stimulating environment during this time has lasting effects, but by age 4, the brain's foundational architecture is mostly complete. This neuroplasticity likely makes children more susceptible to encounters with the otherworldly. Adults often second-guess such experiences, rationalizing or suppressing them. I know I do it all the time. In contrast, children, especially very young ones, are more likely to absorb the fantastic into their sense of reality. Author Deborah Trunkale, mother of a special needs child, argues that children's formative brains allow them to integrate otherworldly encounters in ways adults cannot. But what purpose could these more malleable minds serve? Across global traditions, shamanic initiations often begin in childhood and share features with abduction accounts, such as trauma, transformation, and altered states of consciousness. Could these early life experiences serve as metaphysical initiations, ritualistic ordeals, drawing individuals into the role of shamanic intermediaries? Mike Cleland, author, explores the possibility in his book The Messengers, Owls, Synchronicity, and the UFO Abductee. He states, in today's world, the idea of a child exploring their inner depths is largely dismissed. We lack a cultural framework for understanding shamanic sickness. It's often misread as mental illness. Cleland quotes author Joe Lewis and says, quote, people undergoing these abduction experiences are, often unwillingly, being drawn into a kind of shamanic apprenticeship. They're being taught. Their consciousness is expanding. They're being given tools to heal. We need shamans. If society doesn't produce them, the universe will. This also calls to mind various stories of children at the center of intense poltergeist activity. Specifically, to my mind, the story of Janet Hodgson, the young girl at the epicenter of the Enfield poltergeist case, being told by a pair of South American shamans that she was born an exceedingly powerful shaman. However, it would require her to leave her life behind and relocate to Brazil, which she was apparently, and quite understandably, unwilling to do, for whatever this Xavier's School for Gifted Shaman was in Brazil. This parallel is hard to ignore, and as author and professor of religious studies Jeffrey Kripal notes about the book Communion, Whitley Strieber's iconic abduction narrative, quote, it reads like an initiatory ordeal. The owls and wolves function as spirit animals. His trances and out-of-body experiences are plain to see, if we look with an open mind. Consider that a single word from the female entity in his story, quote-unquote chosen, sets the entire transformative journey in motion. So the following is Joshua Cutchin's final hypothesis from his book, Thieves in the Night. He states that in popular media, there's a problematic trope known as, quote, the inspirationally disadvantaged, unquote. Characters with disabilities granted near mystical abilities. Examples include John Coffey from The Green Mile, Chance from the film Being There, Christian Wolf from The Accountant, or even Ray from Rain Man. While often criticized, the real-world existence of autistic savants invites speculation. Could there also be spiritual savants? It's here that we must tread carefully, as not all developmental disorders carry metaphysical implications, obviously, and most result from genetic or environmental causes. These conditions are not inherently quote-unquote gifts and shouldn't be romanticized. Those who live with such disabilities deserve support, dignity, and empathy, not more forms of othering. Talking to you, RFK. But what if, in a small subset of cases, such conditions reflect contact with non-human intelligences? Could changelings, chamans, and abductees be a singular overlapping phenomenon? What if autism, in some instances, arises from encounters with the other world, either as a conduit or a side effect of this interaction? From out of his extensive research, Joshua Cutchin has developed a speculative framework. A non-human force, aka the other, the others, the otherness, limited in its ability to act physically, seeks connection with humanity. To bridge this gap, the other selects a human intermediary, often a young, mentally pliable individual, sometimes one with a history of trauma. Through altered states of consciousness, this intermediary is contacted. This interaction may induce a developmental condition, such as autism, either as a byproduct or a mechanism of communion. The child may then enter a fugue state and physically retreat into nature, long considered a sacred realm of transformation, though this excludes those physically unable to wander, like infants, and this absence resembles supernatural abduction. Upon returning, the child is changed. Effects vary. In some, there's increased creativity or psychic sensitivity. In others, perhaps more severe cognitive shifts. In rare cases, the results may be death or permanent disappearance. Many spiritual traditions warn of the dangers of divine encounters. In Greek mythology, many individuals were outright destroyed upon seeing or interacting with the gods. Similarly, in the Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna is overwhelmed when Krishna reveals his cosmic form. Even the Bible said that to look upon divinity is death. The pattern's fairly universal. Contact with the divine is transformative, but not always survivable. What exactly is this quote-unquote divine? Interpretations vary. The God of the Bible, the collective unconsciousness, extraterrestrials, fey beings, ancestral spirits, the simulation, even time travelers. It remains open-ended. A compelling real-life account comes from the aforementioned Mike Clelland's stories from The Messengers. In 2012, a woman named Allison, a pseudonym, in North Carolina, participated in Native American rituals, including fasting at a sweat lodge. Days later, while hiking with her boyfriend, she was inexplicably drawn into a meadow surrounded by owl calls and a deep sense of dislocation. She then proceeded to strip off her clothes, sat alone, and watched ringed cloud-like UFOs swirl overhead. Telepathically, she received a message. They had been searching for her and were initiating a spiritual transformation. While search teams scoured the area, she sat undetected for 5 hours in a spot her boyfriend had repeatedly checked. She was unfazed by the cool temperatures and unaware of how much time had passed. Afterwards, Allison experienced a renewed passion for music and developed perfect pitch. Though later diagnosed with bipolar disorder, she questioned whether her experience was psychotic or something far more profound. Cleland writes, Allison played music with a new intensity. It could be seen as mania or as a gift. Her perfect pitch resembles the abilities of a savant. Her story fits remarkably well within the hypothesis laid out above. So what did she encounter? Aliens, fairies, psychopomps, a dissociative episode, a shamanic initiation, or all of them at once? The archaic term touched in the head, quote unquote, once used to describe individuals with developmental disabilities, likely stems from the idea that such people were somehow in contact with non-human or supernatural consciousness. Much like other enigmatic conditions, paranormal child abduction phenomena appear to run in families, suggesting an inheritable component. If communication with the other world can influence human development, autism stands as a prime candidate. It's perhaps the most liminal of developmental conditions, existing across a wide spectrum and defying easy categorization. As with reports of supernatural contact, many researchers have drawn connections between autism and trauma, including epigenetic influences. One study, for instance, found that women abused in childhood were statistically more likely to have children on the autism spectrum. While the folkloric link between developmental differences and changelings is well documented, some voices within the UFO community propose a similar link between autism and alien abduction. Michael Mencken, best known and often ridiculed for his invention of the thought screen helmet, hosts a website claiming rising autism rates are a direct result of extraterrestrial interference. In support of this idea, experiencer Donna Lynn has said that some nonverbal autistic children are incarnated extraterrestrial souls who volunteered to help humanity. In another case, a child named Henry from Pennsylvania began showing signs of autism at age 9 after repeated visits from little gray men who allegedly took him aboard a craft. The credibility of these accounts vary, but they provide thought-provoking, if controversial, data points. Autistic savants, and notably many alleged abductees, demonstrate skills in art, mathematics, memory, or music that far exceeds what is considered typical. Some appear to possess capabilities that challenge the boundaries of current scientific understanding. Researchers Ann M. Donlan and Paul Haskew have documented telepathic communication between nonverbal autistic children and their caregivers, suggesting that these children could intuit and transmit thoughts via a quote-unquote sixth sense. Among seasoned facilitators, they claim such occurrences are no longer considered rare. Psychiatrist Dr. Diane Powell, a Johns Hopkins graduate, has taken a more empirical approach. She hypothesized that nonverbal autistic children might be particularly suited to demonstrate psi phenomena such as telepathy. In a documented experiment, a 10-year-old girl named Haley consistently transcribed sequences of digits with extraordinary precision, quote, reading her therapist's mind from behind a screen using stencils and a text-to-speech device. Her accuracy, over 90% across multiple trials, was captured on time-stamped video, eliminating the likelihood of fraud. Some advocates argue that what we call quote-unquote disabilities may actually signal an evolutionary shift in human consciousness. Author William Stillman, for instance, believes that autistic children have access to quote-unquote subtle realms, asserting first-hand encounters with their psychic talents. Comic book creator and occultist Grant Morrison, one of my favorites, once posited that disorders like multiple personality disorder are misunderstood adaptations or alternative ways of navigating reality that defy the ego-driven model of the modern world. Morrison suggested that people labeled as mentally ill or developmentally disabled would have been shamans in earlier societies, revered intermediaries between the physical and spiritual realms. He argued that many modern cultures pathologize traits that, in other contexts, would be honored as gifts. This sentiment is echoed by Jason Horsley, aka Aeolus Kephas, a self-identified quote-unquote autist and experiencer. In 2013 podcast, Horsley explained that even the lowest functioning nonverbal autists are not absent or quote-unquote retarded, but rather entirely present, just operating with a form of consciousness that our current society fails to recognize or value. Their behavior, he said, reflects some unconscious aspect of humanity that we can't see because we've become blind to alternative models of being. In this view, autism is helping humanity reconnect with neglected layers of perception and reality. Autism diagnoses have risen dramatically since the 1970s. Once thought to affect just 1 in every 2,500 individuals, rates began climbing in the late 20th century. From the 1980s to the 90s, the incidence of pervasive developmental disorders rose by nearly tenfold. Between 1993 and 2003 alone, U.S. autism diagnoses skyrocketed by 657%. Holy shit. So 2017, the CDC estimated that 1 in 68 American children is on the spectrum. Certainly, improved diagnostics and expanded definitions undoubtedly play a role. But experts like Michael Rosenoff from Autism Speaks argues these factors alone do not explain the magnitude of the rise. If this dramatic increase is not purely statistical, could it signal something more? Something profound? Despite skepticism, many cultures interpret autistic traits as spiritual. Imelda Almquist, a mother of 2 autistic children, asked her kids about their quote-unquote stimming behaviors, hand flapping, humming, or spinning, and concluded that they were engaged in a spirit communication or shamanic journeying. Some historical religious figures show traits consistent with modern autism diagnoses. Indian Saint Ramakrishna displayed strong social withdrawal, aversion to touch, and intense focus, now recognized as common in ASD. Catholic writers have speculated similarly about figures like Brother Juniper and St. Joseph of Cupertino. In contemporary ultra-Orthodox Jewish communities, autistic children have even been seen as spiritual conduits. In the 1990s, some Haredi rabbis facilitated gatherings where nonverbal autistic children, through assisted typing, offered messages believed to come from the spirit world. Alien abductees, like shamans and saints, often emerge from their experiences with a sense of mission, a message urging humanity to change. These messages often warn of nuclear destruction, environmental collapse, spiritual decay. In many ways, this echoes the traditional role of the shaman, to restore harmony between people, nature, and the unseen. The explosion of alien abduction stories in the late 20th century coincided with growing technological alienation and ecological crisis. As society turned away from nature and spirit, perhaps the other, the others, the otherness, once personified as fairies, now as aliens or cryptids, returned to reinitiate the lost dialogue. What once were gifts from the other world are now often seen as intrusions, reflecting our spiritual disconnection. Is the other becoming more insistent in its attempts to reach us? Or could the rising tide of autism and alien contact both reflect a deeper spiritual urgency, an attempt by the cosmos to recalibrate us? While folklore warns of fairies, aliens, and cryptids stealing children, the greatest threat may be far more mundane: the world which we leave behind for these children. Environmental degradation, social discord, and/or spiritual emptiness pose a much greater threat to future generations than any monster in the dark. In the end, it's not just about reclaiming belief in the other, it's about remembering our place in the world. As magician and writer Gordon White puts it, our task is to re-enchant the world. Even if fairies aren't real, imagining them invites awe and reverence for the natural world. Once again, I personally think that Shinto and the animists retain something much of the rest of the world still desperately needs. Even if the aliens never come, the idea humbles us and opens our imagination to the cosmos. It probably also doesn't hurt to abandon the mindset that someone or something on the wing is going to one day magically appear in the sky to quote-unquote save us all. Whether these phenomena are real or metaphorical, they offer a powerful counterpoint to an increasingly hyper-rationalist or nihilistic dystopian culture. They remind us the world is still, and always will be, a deeply mysterious and magical place. That's going to be it for me. This has been Kooks, Cranks, and Iconoclasts. Hope you enjoyed this one. I put a lot of hard work into it. And we'll see you on the next one. Thanks. Bye. Love you.
Shaman.